All right, here we go. Okay, hello to those who are joining. If you have any questions, comments, feedback, I wonder if the people watching are just finishing up from the HSC, or if you have just started the HSC. It'd be good to let me know. Just put it in the comments. Hello, I'm sorry if I'm not saying your name correctly, but Madhav, am I saying that correctly? I'm going well. Thanks. Hey everyone. Hi to everyone who's joining. As I just said before, if you have just finished the HSC, let me know how you felt about your exams. Was anything tricky? Do you have any questions about any of the sections or any particular aspects of it? It'd be good to get some feedback. Good to know where you're at. If you're just starting the HSC, we'll run through some things there. Just put in the comments right now, put in the questions, anything that you are uncertain about or anything you'd like to know more about, anything that you would like help with. Happy to go through some free feedback for you today as well. Anything, it could be English related, could be economics, could be some other subjects as well. So free guidance today. I'm just doing this. This is a very spontaneous thing. So thank you for whoever's joining. But yeah, if you have questions or comments or you want help with something, like even if you want to share a response or you want me to look at something and give you critical feedback, put it in the chat right now and just tell me how I can help you. So and then we'll go from there. So I'll just go off what's in the comments. Otherwise, I am going to just talk a little bit about how you can prepare for this term if you are just starting year 12. But it'd be great to know, out of you who are watching, have you just finished year 12 or are you just starting? Or are you in a different year? Or are you watching from overseas or somewhere outside of Australia? Let me know where you're watching from. It'd be good to just get a feel for that. And that way I can kind of tailor what I'm saying to you guys who are watching. So we'll allow a few others to join. But yeah, please do write in the comments now. Finishing my last exam tomorrow, just Dan. Good luck, Dan. That's very exciting, but also a little bit nerve-wracking, I'm sure. What is your exam tomorrow? I assume your name is actually Dan, but just Dan, what is your exam? And AA08, you're just starting the Common Module and the Crucible. Stick around because I will be able to give you some really solid guidance on that text in just a moment. So please do stay on. I think it should help you quite a lot. I'll give you some key concepts that you can explore in that text that you can apply directly to your human experience assessment. But yeah, just Dan, yeah, what is that exam? And Madhav, again, sorry if I'm not saying it correctly. I have my first assessment. I'm just going to put this up. I have my first assessment for the Crucible, and I've written like 2/3 of my essay, but I don't know if it is good or not. Hey, let's talk about it, right? How much are you guys happy to share? That's what it's going to come down to. So if you're willing to share, Madhav, if you're willing to share like a few sentences or give me like a bit of your introduction with a question, do you want to give me some of your body paragraph that I can go through? Just copy paste it. I won't put it on the main screen, but I can put it up into a document and I can give you live edits. You don't have to give me the whole thing, but you can at least apply the feedback as can everyone else. AA08, you can do the same as well. So if you guys want to share something right now, put it in there. Justin, DT tomorrow. Good luck. Hope you crush it. Obviously, you're doing the theory side of that. Hey, Justin, quick question. Are you into media yourself? Like when you do DT, what aspect of that are you into insofar as the design is concerned? Are you familiar with like video editing and all of that? Or are you do you do more like clothing? Like what kind of DT are you doing on the practical side? What's your interest there? In the meantime, anyone else who's joining, again, AA08, Madhav Saki, could you guys please get something that you want me to review for you? and I can take you through it. I'll give you live review, live feedback. Normally we'll do this with a few students. I don't have a whole lot of time these days to do like private, one-on-one tutoring. I do still do it because it's really important for me to stay sharp on my skills with all of that. But obviously I'm trying to like run Jettle and help create all this other content for you guys. But I'm still sharp with it, and this I'm happy to do this for free for you in this session. But you just need to share some material there. I think there's a little bit of a lag with the comments as I'm seeing them. So just bear with me until I can see some of those. But Madhav, I'll just send the whole thing and you can just read whatever you'd like. Yeah, Madhav, if you're okay with me doing that live in front of a YouTube audience and it's going to be published there, then it's obviously going to help you a lot. So 100%, let's do that. If you want to email it to me, send it to jonny@jettle.com. I put the email in the chat. Send it to me right now, and we'll work with that. Okay. Send it to this email. There's my email, jonny@jettle.com. I'll be checking my inbox in. Let's say I'm going to check it in three minutes, and then we'll work with that. Okay. And I'm going to go through that now because a couple of you are doing the Crucible as well. That's going to really help. I know a lot of people watching are doing the Crucible. And I'll give some advice on other texts as well. Is anyone else studying anything else? Because I can go through that as well. For my major works, it was industrial, I suppose. Okay, industrial, just Dan, that's cool. Very cool. Because we're currently actually hiring for some video editors and animators. So I was going to see if that was up your alley. But, if you feel like you could help out with Jettle once you're done with your exams, definitely hit me up. You can use the same email. Yeah, Madhav. Yeah, I don't mind. Might get embarrassed. Look, nothing to be embarrassed. You guys are only 3 or 4 weeks in to year 12. And also the funny thing is, like, it's really good of you to share that because that kind of humility to actually share your essay and offer that up for feedback. It shows humility, and humility is how you learn and it's how you improve. There are thousands of students in the state right now who I could say, hey, I'll give you some great feedback that's going to help you if you're willing to share this, just with a few people watching this, and they won't do it because they're embarrassed to share it. But you're actually willing to put that out there. So I really do appreciate that, and I think you're gonna learn and grow a lot in life with that level of humility. So congratulations, just for having that humility in itself. Armin, I hope I'm saying that correctly. You're in first term and you've got a question for a multimodal. Yeah, thanks for posting the question. We've got a question here just before I get up Madhav's response that we can deconstruct. How would I interpret this question? You're studying Merchant of Venice. Here is the other aspect of that. How would I interpret this question for the Merchant of Venice? How did text give insight into the complexities of human behavior and motivation to reflect particular lives and culture? Okay, it's a good question. Let me show you what I'll do with that question. If I can pull this up, I'm going to do kind of a dual screen here, and I'm going to pull up another doc that I can actually write that up on, and I'll show you exactly what I do with this kind of question, because you need to deconstruct it, of course. You need to deconstruct it. So let's see if we can get a kind of shared screen going on here. 1 second. I don't know if this is going to work. Give me a sec, guys. Present, share screen. I'm going to share a window. Here we go. Give me a second, guys. Yeah, so look, let me just give you the general feedback. At the moment, I'm not sure why that is not sharing. Let's do share here. Okay, give me 1 sec, guys. All right, with that question, how did text give insight into the complexities of human behavior and motivation? So straight away, the key terms that I see there are human behavior and motivations, or motivation, right? So we need to actually unpack each of those. And then it says to reflect particular lives and cultures. So we also need to unpack each of those words. Thanks, Madhav. I'll get it up in a moment. So yeah, no problem at all. No problem at all. So with a question like this, let's focus in on this question. How many key terms are in this question? If I asked all of you that, what would you say? A lot of people would say there's like 6 or 7 key words here. And some people would even include the word how in that. And that's a big mistake. When we're talking about keywords, we're talking about words that you need to pepper throughout your entire essay so that the marker is very much aware that you are answering that particular question and you're answering the core pieces of the question. There can't be 6 or 7 key terms, right? What I would say are the key terms are the behavior, right? Human behavior, motivation, and lives/cultures would be the kind of third one. Excuse me. The word complexity is going to get you into trouble, okay? Because when you see the word complexity, excuse me, you're actually going to be using that word rather than saying what the complexity is. So let's figure that out. What is the complex thing about human behavior in The Merchant of Venice, right? How do humans behave in a complex way? Well, the first thing that comes to mind, if I'm thinking like chronologically throughout it, is you can see that the behavior is, if we're thinking about the relationship, between, we've got the Christian adversaries, you've got Shylock, right? You've got Shylock, you've got the Christian adversaries, Antonio, etc. And what you have there is you have this tendency to alienate a perceived other, right? Anyone who you perceive to be different to you, there's a tendency for a group, a collective, who have the same worldview to alienate someone who ostensibly threatens that worldview or those values. So straight away, that's quite a complex human behavior because it works both ways, right? Shylock is alienated, he's ostracized, he's marginalized because of that prejudicial behavior. Notice how I'm defining and unpacking that behavior word already. I said I want to focus on behavior, so I'm using adjectives to say what type of behavior. That's how you unpack it. That is how you're going to have a really solid thesis. Excuse me. A really solid thesis and introduction and essay as a whole is going to come from you actually being very specific as to what type of behavior is present in the text that you want to explore. Prejudicial behavior, behavior that marginalizes, right? Behavior that alienates. And then we want to talk about the way in which behavior is often reciprocal, the reciprocation, the reciprocity behind that behavior. There's a key insight for behavior, that in the play we see it to be reciprocal. It's reciprocated. The hate is reciprocated. You want to treat me like a dog? I'll act like a dog. Beware of my fangs, he says. Shylock says to the people who alienate him. He says, you want to treat me like that? I'll act like that. Okay, so you treat someone poorly, they'll act poorly. There is a kind of almost a paradox that in that if you treat someone like something that they are not, they can actually ironically become that thing, right? That's how humans behave. We tend to fulfill those expectations. And if we're alienated or marginalized, we'll retaliate with an equal or greater degree of hostility, right? Because we're going to defend our position as individuals. Excuse me. So hopefully that already helps you with thinking about the behavior there. There's also some anomalous behavior going on. You know that anomaly is a key word in the rubric, and an anomaly means something that's like an outlier, something that's different from the norm. And someone who's really anomalous is Portia. I'm just giving you a couple of examples, a couple of ways to approach this. Now, this might be for a different body paragraph where you're exploring this very anomalous behavior as Portia is someone who is potentially marginalized as well as a female. She's living within a patriarchal society. Now I'm going to look at the word motivation. A patriarchal society that is motivated to empower men and disempower women. Okay, they're motivated to do that so that the male patriarchs can maintain their power. Now, Portia's behavior is very anomalous because what she does is she self-fashions herself, right? She self-fashions herself as a judge, as a male judge. So Portia dresses up as a judge. That's her behavior. That's her response because she's motivated. Notice how I'm using motivated now. Describe their behavior and say how they're motivated. She is motivated to basically assume a position of power that allows her to overcome her disempowerment as a woman within a patriarchal society. Excuse me. So hopefully this is making sense for you so far. So when you talk about that paragraph, I think it's really good to explore Portia's anomalous behavior there and how she kind of inverts the power balance, right? By actually dressing up. She dresses up. It's very meta-theatrical. She is performing within the broader performance of the play itself. So she has this kind of meta-theatrical performance as a judge. And I think that behavior is really anomalous. Not many people would do that as a woman then, but she's doing that. And that's because she's motivated to kind of almost, you could say, assert some power or to invert the hierarchy there, the patriarchy. And and you can already see how I've been answering the reflecting particular lives and culture. Portia's motivation is to challenge a culture that is based on patriarchal values, right? She's challenging her life as a woman within that culture, within that potentially prejudicial culture. Shylock as well. You can talk about the culture around race, and you can talk about anti-Semitism, and you can talk about the clash of religious worldviews and the proclivity, the tendency for individuals to alienate one another, and how the culture is very divisive in Venice in this play, okay? That's a key insight for you as well. So I hope you're taking notes of all of this. I think we'll post this up on YouTube anyway. It'll be up there if you want to rewatch some of it. But if I was a student right now listening to what I'm saying, I'm taking down the specific notes that I'm saying that are unpacking the key terms of the question. What kind of culture are we living in Merchant of Venice? It's a divisive culture. Great. It's a prejudicial culture. People's lives within that culture are alienated. People are oppressed within that culture. People act in anomalous ways, in prejudicial ways, and people are motivated to assert power as a collective, right? The Christians forcing Shylock to convert his faith. Okay, admittedly, Shylock also acts as a villain throughout. You know, he's very greedy and kind of doesn't show any remorse, but he's also been hard done by. So you can have that debate in one paragraph as well about whether he is a villain or a victim. Okay, is his behavior justified as a victim, or is it inspired by a more malevolent potential, more evil motivations? Okay, so you want to connect everything to that, talk about those lives. You can also talk about the broader discontentment in Merchant of Venice. You can talk about the broader discontentment of all the characters, that because they live in this divisive culture, a culture that is potentially overly obsessed or infatuated with materialism. There's a lot of talk about money, right? It's a mercantile society. It's all about trade and deals, right? They're talking about the ports and bringing things in. That's why a lot of debts are given out in the first place. So money kind of powers this society. So you could argue that there's a comment being made on that culture around a materialistic culture that actually causes humans to feel a lack of fulfillment. Excuse me. Excuse me, guys. I have been talking for hours before this. I was doing some tutoring and things like that. So my voice is going. I think I had COVID a couple of weeks ago, and that's not or a cold, or at least, but it's kind of sticking with me. Now, yeah, Armin, I hope that's helped. I hope that's helped, but hopefully that's useful for anyone else doing Merchant of Venice. I think, let me give you three key things to focus on for the Merchant of Venice. One key thing is on that relationship between Shylock and his Christian adversaries, right? There's a bargain made, right? The pound of flesh bargain that everyone knows about, whether you've seen the play, read the play or not. Think about that dynamic. Think about who's alienating who. Whose response is justified? Are they both justified? It's what you'd call kind of a zero-sum game, right? Where there's no real winners out of that relationship. Think about why that is. Think about whether Shylock is a victim or a villain. That's an interesting paragraph to consider, especially in relation to the question that you see on screen about human behavior, motivations, lives, and culture. The second consideration is how women play into it, the role of women, gender stereotypes, how Portia assumes a male persona to actually invert the power hierarchy within this patriarchal culture. And how it's actually rather ironic that she was like a marginalized individual, perhaps, because of her gender, because of her sex. She's marginalized just like Shylock, and yet she shows no empathy for him once she assumes that position of power. It's like the power gets to her head straight away. This is just one take. You could consider that. Maybe you disagree with what I just said, but it's something to consider. The other thing is that, and the third thing that I mentioned is to talk about why everyone in the society, in the Merchant of Venice, why is everyone discontent? Why is everyone unfulfilled? Why is everyone unhappy? Antonio even says at the beginning, I know not why I am so sad, right? It's a divisive culture, and maybe it's a culture, there is a culture here that is obsessed with the wrong things, the wrong values. They're not about tolerance. They're not about community. And they're also not even about individuality. It's all about groupthink. It's all about, hey, if you're not aligned with my worldviews, then we'll alienate you. That's a divisive culture. And as I said, it's like a zero-sum game. There's no winners in that, right? You're divisive. You're buying into ideology. You're not showing mercy or forgiveness. There's not a lot of mercy going on in this play. And when you have a culture that doesn't show mercy, forgiveness, acceptance, tolerance, what you end up with is a general kind of cultural malaise, right? Malaise, I think I'm saying that word incorrectly. But basically, there's this feeling, there's this lack of fulfillment. Everyone's just obsessed with money. They're kind of disorientated. They've lost their way. They're no longer focused on the right values about family, forgiveness, acceptance. The virtue of this society seems to have been stripped away. And now everyone is unhappy and they don't know why. It's a lack of self-awareness. So there are three powerful things to think about when you're looking at the Merchant of Venice. Hopefully the way I deconstructed the question has helped others as well. When, here we go, elite normie. Yeah, that's elite timing, my friend. You are on time for one of these live things. Hey, if you've got any questions, elite, put them in there. We're working through them. Hopefully, Armin, that's all good. Sounds like you're satisfied. Glad I could help. Okay, now I did say to Madhav, again, I wish I could pronounce your name. I wish I could get your audio through so I could say that correctly. I'm just going to call you. Oh, actually, no, I'm not going to call you that. I was going to call you the Madman. But we'll just go with Madhav, and we'll look at your response here. No worries, Armin. Let me just pull up, guys. Let me just pull up this response. I'm not going to go through the whole thing. I'm just going to look at the question, and I'm going to have a look at part of your introduction to begin with, okay? This is hopefully going to be helpful. Let's have a look. I'm going to paste it in. I'm going to see if this works. Okay, let's have a look at the question. Everyone have a look at this question. I'll post it up, and then we'll have a look at each of these things. I can't share the screen at the moment for some weird reason, but that's no problem. We can get by. So let's have a look. Okay, that didn't work, did it? Here's the question, and let me just, yeah, that's fine. Through representing the complexity of human experiences, again, like these questions love to have complexity, and it's a bit of a trap. It's almost a deliberate trap, right? Because it's going to separate, the men from the boys, so to speak, right? Because what happens there is the weaker responses are going to be using the word complexity a lot without actually saying what the complexity is. That's the key. That's the key distinction between the Band 6 student and the Band 4 student, okay? The Band 6 student is going to tell me what the complexity is, and they're not going to worry about using the word complexity too much. They're going to tell me what the complexity is in relation to the other keywords of the question, okay? So it'll tell me what are the relevant human experiences that are complex, and it'll tell me why they're complex. It also says, through representing those experiences, composers challenge responders. Okay, we're challenged. You need to talk about how the responder is engaged here to reflect on their understanding of themselves and the world. Very generic question. Not my favorite question, but that's okay. It's very generic, but it's about how does it prompt self-reflection, and how does it tell us about where we sit in the world? what I would say with the Crucible, you need to be thinking about what's our responsibility in the world when we go through this text. Okay, so that's the first thing to be aware of, Madhav. You want to be aware that when it says what's our understanding of ourselves, think about it's more so I would interpret that as saying what's our role, because the Crucible is trying to wake us up. You watch that play, you're meant to be woken up, and when you're woken up, you're basically meant to become aware of the way in which power structures are exploited in society, the way in which we are, and it's happening today. It's so interesting. I'd love to just like speak to you guys on it more generally, but I'll try and keep this practical and maybe just remind me at the end and I can speak on it. But right now, today, in the world we're in, especially in America, on social media, it's so divided. The world's so divided, right? It shouldn't be like that. You should have a whole group of individuals thinking for themselves, but it just doesn't work like that. As soon as someone has power over the way people think, they basically control that whole group, right? And they can control the world if that group is big enough. And the Crucible is trying to wake you up from that, because as soon as you stop thinking for yourself, you become highly exploitable and you'll be taken advantage of. And what you'll do is you'll forfeit your moral integrity. All of your morals, all of your values will go out the window if you become part of a group and you can't divorce yourself from that group in any respect. So it's one of those weird things. Slight tangent here, but bear with me. When you guys hear about like political parties and stuff, I always find it fascinating when someone says, I'm a member of the Liberal Party. I'm a member of the Labour Party. What do you mean you're a member? Would you like, are you going to, I always get worried. Are you going to think for yourself? And, in America, they say I'm a Republican, I'm a Democrat. It's like, okay, some people are using that in a general sense to say, I generally like agree with their policies. But the worrying thing is what you see throughout history, even with the Crucible, with the witch hunt, is as soon as people are made to fear the consequences of disagreeing with the group or the party that they're aligned with, then that's a horrible thing because you've lost all your individuality. It's like, why aren't you agreeing with some of each party? Why can't you agree with some things? When you're a member, what have you signed up for? And what are you giving up? So it's important to retain your individuality. This relates to the Crucible and a lot of the other texts that are studied in the Common Module. And if you forfeit your individuality by conforming to a group, to a collective ideology, which is exactly what was happening at the time that the Crucible was written, right? McCarthyism. Americans were losing their democratic freedoms, right? Ironically, as America was trying to defend democracy as a whole against the Soviet Union, communism, they were worried about losing their freedoms. Americans were getting brainwashed through fear. They were worried about being accused of being communists. And actually, what that meant was because they were afraid of being called something, they were afraid to speak out. Because if they spoke out, then you'd be accused of being a communist. So it's kind of this paradox where you can never get out of it. And suddenly you've lost all of your freedoms. You don't even have free speech. And that's what happens when you feel like you're going to get isolated from a group. And you see this all over the internet now as well. You see people, as soon as you say one thing that is inconsistent, to use a rubric term, with a belief of a minority group or something like that, then you are demonized and ultimately deplatformed and censored, right? So there's this mass censorship going on across a lot of the big tech, companies at the moment. And, that's not a good thing, in my opinion. So we want freedom of speech. We want these freedoms. So hopefully I've kind of answered that. It challenges us to reflect on our position in the world. Well, we need to assume responsibility and we need to speak up. We need to be like John Proctor in the way that he defended truth and he actually gave up his life for it. So it's a very dramatic and extreme example. It's a hyperbole of what our responsibility in this world is. We have to stand up for what we know to be true. Otherwise, there will be grave injustices and people will fully lose their moral integrity just to belong to a community. But it's a community built on nothing. It's built on false foundations. It's built on weak foundations. It's built on the foundations of tyranny. And that's what results, right? So if you want to avoid tyranny, then you need to assert your individuality. And if you're afraid to, voice your opinion on something because you're afraid of being deplatformed or canceled or killed in the case of the Crucible because of the witch hunt that was going on, that was the ultimate consequence, right? You actually die. I think it's in a weird way in today's society, you do kind of die. You die virtually. If you stand up enough, for what you believe to be true. I'm not saying that everyone who gets deplatformed, it was speaking truth, but they're speaking their opinion at least very often. And if they're deplatformed, they're kind of killed off because they're killed off out of the virtual world, which is a big part of the world. You have the physical world and the digital world, and they're both part of the world. And I think if you're killed off, on all the platforms and all social media, then that's an interesting idea, and you should all think about that. What does that mean about? Yeah, that's good, Matt, in terms of that that paragraph. And I'm going to look at some of your sentences in a second. By the way, I really appreciate you offering those up. Again, I'm not going to go through the full essay, but I will have a look at a lot of that. And I'm about to give you the practical breakdown of a sentence and show you how to improve that. But I think this is really important. Hopefully, you're following on the concepts here, and then I'll move to some other questions. But it's important for you to be aware that, especially in this generation now, in your generation, right, in our generation. I'm slightly removed, but I'm still part of your gen. I'm pretty closely aligned. I'm not that old yet. And I think we have a responsibility to defend the truth, to not even defend the truth, just to defend the right to speak one's beliefs, right? Because as soon as you stop speaking your beliefs and everyone's afraid, then you get tyranny, right? And the government will have all the control, or these big social media companies will have all of the control. And you won't be allowed to speak even when you want to. So we have a responsibility to defend our beliefs and to refuse to conform to certain ideologies that don't align with our values. Because what we ultimately want to happen is we want to be able to express our opinions. And if people disagree with them, we want to have a civil discourse about it, and the truth will ultimately prevail with that kind of system, right? Because the truth kind of works its way to the top when you discuss things, when you have rational actors. But no one's acting rationally in the Crucible. No one was acting rationally during 1950s America, during the Cold War, when people were afraid of being called a communist. If you're afraid of being called a communist, and that's all you can think about because you're going to be put in jail or you're going to be killed or something like that for treason, then you're not going to feel comfortable to speak the truth. And the truth is that the government had completely overextended its power, and it was trying to hold on to its power by making people fearful of the consequences of challenging their power. And that's the paradox. When the government gets greedy for power, they try to lock it up by making you too scared to even challenge them. And if you go and look at any dictatorship in the world right now or in history, that's exactly what happens. The people who challenge these dictators just get killed. So then no one challenges them, and then they stay in power. And that's the whole thing. That's what they wanted. They're not even a legitimate ruler. They're not even representing the democratic will of the people. They're not actually preserving people's freedoms, which ironically is often the reason that they're voted in the first place. So you need to be very careful of dictatorships and totalitarian regimes. And Matt, for your thing, for context, you need to speak about the abuse of power by McCarthy in America. And paradoxically, how in trying to defend America's democratic freedoms, those democratic freedoms were lost. That's the key, because everyone was made to fear something that didn't exist, right? All these communists around where there were all of these false claims. And that really just led to this paranoia and hysteria. And it meant that everyone was overly dependent on the government, which is exactly what the government wanted, because then they can hold on to the power. When people are dependent on you, you have power over them. When no one cares about you, when no one relies on you, when no one values what you say or do, when no one gives you that authority, you have no power. So think about that dynamic. Now, Madhav, in terms of your response there, right? Let me just pull up something more specific. So we're looking at something that's complex, of course. Let me have a look at your thesis here. So I'm going to copy your thesis in for those watching. Hopefully this helps. Hopefully this pastes. I mean, I feel like it's going to do it in a really weird way, which yes, it is. So I'm just going to do the first part. Hopefully this works. Here's the first part of your intro, and I'll get the second part in a second. Excuse me. Through Arthur Miller's representation of the Crucible, individual experiences and a sense of self-preservation can eclipse the collective human experience. individual experiences and a sense of self-preservation. Madhav, all right, now the technical, breakdown happens. You've got a double up there. And for anyone watching, try and avoid these double ups in your expressions, especially in the thesis. See how in this first sentence, you say individual experiences and a sense of self-preservation. Well, you've just you just said individual experiences, threw it out there, and then went on to say something more specific and better, but you kind of left the individual experiences as this kind of vague thing that's undefined. You didn't define it, so why are you using it? If self-preservation is the relevant individual experience, then you should say the individual experience of self-preservation. Now it's all one thing. That's what we want. We don't want the double ups. No double ups. Just focus on one key phrase when you're conveying an idea. One idea. Don't list things. See, hopefully you can see how redundant, pointless the individual experiences bit is there. But what you could do is change that to the individual experience of self-preservation is seen to eclipse the collective human experience. Now, that's true to an extent, depending on how you look at things, right? I don't know if it eclipses it. I think the message is that we want it to eclipse it. I think throughout the whole play, self-preservation, you've kind of left the collective human experience thing really undefined as well. That's why I'm struggling to kind of make complete sense of it. I would love to, if we could get you up or something and have a chat. I don't know if I can do that, if I could pull you in, but I'll try and set that up for next time, guys, when I do a live stream, so you can come on and we can actually just discuss a couple of things, because it's hard without any more context to give you the full breakdown here. But 2 tips so far, just reading this. Get rid of individual experience, or say the individual experience of self-preservation. Don't have a double up there. You've left individual experience as a very vague and undefined term. We don't want any of those in your essay. The second thing is you've been vague on the collective human experience. You haven't actually said how it can eclipse that experience. So I'm thinking, what do you mean by that? Like self-preservation. Well, I know everyone else is trying to preserve their reputation and preserve their life, so they're lying. But how does that eclipse the collective human experience? It certainly eclipses collective unity. I would say that the individual desire to preserve one's reputation eclipses the individual desire to assert moral integrity, right? It's actually a conflict between the individuals in that way. I would say if you're talking about the collective, I would be talking about how there's a pressure to conform to the collective, which actually leads to the disintegration, the degradation of individual morality. Okay, so hopefully that gives you another take on that concept there. I think you've just been a little bit vague on the collective human experience. And so while it kind of sounds nice with the eclipse thing, after I read it, a couple of times just then, you saw me do it, I couldn't really make sense of it. I couldn't really connect. I want to clear a point. I want you to be far clearer there. So make sure you define them. Otherwise, don't use them. If you can't define them, don't use them. Okay, let's have a look at the next part of your thesis statement, the first sentence of your introduction. Here it is. Okay, allowing responders to expand, and this is the second part of it. It's still connected to that same sentence. It allows responders to expand an understanding of themselves, sorry about the typos, as well as of the world and people around them. Now, can you guess what I'm going to say to that sentence? It's too vague. You've just repeated the question. Whenever you use the words of the question, don't use too many. Otherwise, you will naturally just end up repeating all of it. So instead, isolate a couple of things. Hopefully, I've already helped you out with that. When you talk about how it allows responders to understand their role in the world as a necessary voice of dissent in times of tyranny. We have a role as individuals to defend the truth and to protect our moral integrity when threatened by tyrannical forces. So if you just took note of some of the things I said, you're going to have a much more specific and insightful thesis rather than what you've done here, where you've tried to tie in too many words of the question. And ironically, by trying to tie in too many, you've actually said nothing specific. Okay? When you try and incorporate too many words and phrases in one sentence from the question, you end up offering no insights. It's a good rule of thumb, right? The more words and phrases you use from the question, the less unique insights you can offer, because your sentence is already getting taken up by all these things. So it's important to use the key terms selectively, definitely throughout all of your introduction and your topic sentences and most of your essay. You want to be using those exact key terms. You don't want to use synonyms, but try not to use big phrases. Try to separate all of the terms, define each of them, think about how they relate to one another. But when you try and put big phrases in together and address multiple key terms at once together and you group them, then you're running into trouble and you're not going to say anything specific. And that's what we have here. So hopefully that's helping you with that. Let me know if you have any follow-up questions on that, Madhav, but I'll have a look at a couple of other things you have here. I'll just have a look at a topic sentence because I think I can help you out pretty easily with this one. I'll set up a proper feedback thing as well. If that's something you guys would be keen for, I'll set up a thing where you can all just leave some responses, leave some paragraphs, and I'll just go through them one by one, give you that feedback. Would you guys be keen for that? Let me know in the comments. And if you haven't already, I assume a lot of you probably are on the channel, you've seen this, subscribe, but make sure you subscribe to the channel. And if you need further resources on all of this and you want to see breakdowns, go to jettle.com. That's where our best resources are. We've made the ultimate kind of practical resources on there. So go to jettle.com if you want access to our best resources. We teamed up with state rank achievers, people who got 100% in their exams, and we got their materials. We broke them down. They're all on there for you on the platform. But also love doing this stuff on YouTube, do this stuff for free. So if that's your best way of accessing the content, then more than happy to continue doing this. Let's see if I can get most of this sentence out. I might not. Okay, not yet, but we can, we'll do the next bit after. So this is a topic sentence. This is Madhav's topic sentence. And for Greg and Anthony, stoked that you love the idea. Shoot us an email. You can do it to Jonny, or you can do it to hello at jettle.com. Send things you'd like reviewed to that. You must include a question. If it's an essay question or a task, include that so that we can break that down. Don't send full essays. Ideally, just send the key bits you want looked at, and we'll get to that as well. Now, with this sentence, this is a topic sentence for the Crucible. From the collective human experience of facing hysteria and paranoia, from the collective human experience of hysteria and paranoia, who can jump in? You should be shouting at your screen, oh, he's doubled up, he's doubled up, he's listed. Correct, you have listed. You've said two words that are basically the same thing, hysteria and paranoia. And yet every student wants to do this all throughout their essay. Why does everyone want to use two words that mean essentially the same thing right next to each other? I know why, deep down psychologically. I think I know why. Because it makes you feel like you're saying more. But less is more. You want to be able to articulate your point in as fewer words as possible. And yet here, you're trying to extend what you're saying by just adding another word that means exactly the same thing. Hysteria, paranoia. Focus on one of those words and make it a more specific phrase. From the collective, from the collective human experience of facing, mass hysteria. That's fine, comma. Paranoia, hysteria, they're the same thing. Let's not kid ourselves. We're just making it seem like we're saying more, but you're not. I can see right through it. And so can the teachers and the markers. Because if I read that, I'm like, oh, you're kind of just giving me very vague words, buzzwords. I like specific phrases. I like phrases. Go for one phrase over multiple words, multiple terms, okay? That's key. Then you say human behaviors can be influenced through false accusations. Here we go. Evidence and suspicion. Shouldn't even be a comma there. Ultimately affecting an individual's ability to perceive themselves as well as the world around them. Okay, so if we go back, huge list, 3 more things: false accusations, evidence, and suspicion. You need to convert that into one meaningful, specific phrase. You need to remove the listing. You were giving me lists of single words. I want a phrase of multiple words. I want one phrase of multiple words, right? So human behavior, what type of human behavior? I mean, I guess you could say that if you're going to be very specific afterwards, but I always ask myself, what type? Go through your whole essay and just ask that every time you say a key word or a buzzword. Have you really been as specific as you could be? Human behaviors can be influenced through false accusations. I would just say, like, instead of false accusations, evidence, suspicion, you say human behaviors can be influenced through a fear. It's really like, what are they really fearing? It's a fear of alienation from the community. It's a fear of basically damage to their reputation, right? We don't want to make that sound too legal or technical, but you basically want to say something like that. And then you say comma. It's getting a bit clunky. You have a lot of commas. Guys, try and reduce the amount of commas. Try and just say what you want to say in less words and not have too many of those clauses with the commas. Then you say ultimately affecting an individual's ability to perceive themselves as well as the world around them. It's like, again, you're throwing in that huge phrase that was in the question earlier. If I go back up to the question, let me see if we can find that here. Composers challenge responders to reflect on their understanding of themselves and the world. You're just saying how they perceive themselves and the world around them. You're not actually giving me an insight. So what can you say specifically about this point that relates to how they are perceiving themselves? Like, it's also about like how it affects the responder. So what is it forcing us to do? It's compelling the responder to do what? To reevaluate our role as, complicit agents, in a broader tyrannical regime. Or, it compels responders to question their subservience to tyrannical mandates or totalitarian mandates. Why are we so subservient to these things? Okay, we have to question that. So give me something specific. It questions the individual's responsibility in the world to question their subservience to oppressive / totalitarian / tyrannical regimes that serve to disempower rather than empower. Okay, you need to have phrases like that are meaningful. Don't list, just give me one powerful concept there about how the individual is affected, how the responder is affected. How are we reconsidering our role within the world? All right, I hope that helps. That's a bit of assistance for your thesis and for your topic sentence there. Hopefully that's going to help you be a lot more specific. And that's the key. Be specific. Don't list. Give me more meaning in each of those phrases. Now, there was another question as well. I'll just quickly have a look at that. Who asked that? Elite Normie, did you say you had a question as well? I got excited by your excitement. So, if I can help in any way, let me know. How many essays do I have to write to get the... Oh, okay, here we go. How many essays do I have to write to get the right to gently caress your forehead? Okay. I should have read that in full before I opened that one. But, I mean, it's not so much about the quantity. It's more about quality, isn't it? So I think you're coming at the question from the wrong angle. How many essays? It's just a quantity thing. It's never a quantity thing. It's a quality thing. If you're listening to the feedback, to take this trivial question in a more serious light, I would be wanting to see a very thoughtful, insightful essay, and then you still wouldn't have the right to caress my forehead, but I certainly would be impressed, and I think what we want to go for is a quality single draft for each essay rather than multiple drafts that try to hit different questions. You want one solid core draft, and then you want to be very well rehearsed, very well skilled at adapting to different question types with that core essay. That's the way you get good. Okay, let's see. Excuse me. I'm clearly getting tired to miss that, but it's funny to go through it anyway. For my multimodal assessment, this is for Mohammed, I would like to link Deception in Merchant of Venice and George Orwell's Animal Farm. Yeah, because often in your first assessment, they bring in the related text. But in your final HSC exams and in your trials, there's no related text in your essay. So you often have to do something with a related text in this first assessment. And for a lot of people, it's going to be a multimodal. Some will have multimodals for a different module, but I think that's going to be common for a lot of you with your common mod. Do you have any ideas on how I can make my analysis band 6 level? I mean, I have many ideas, my friend, but there's a long list of things. I mean, go through our videos, go through the suite. The key is going to be as specific as possible with the ideas. So if you're going to link deception, that's a buzzword. You need to actually be specific about what kind of deception, who's being deceived, why they're being deceived. And then you're going to make a link to Animal Farm. You need to make it clear in what sense are they connected. But whenever you make a connection, make sure you're very specific about the form of connection. Okay? I want to know the type of connection there. So that's the first thing. I mean, be as specific as possible. I would need to know more specifics about your assessment to give you more practical advice on structure and things like that. But what I would say is try and be as specific as you can with that concept, if that's the concept that's tying these together. And make sure that even if the question hasn't asked explicitly about other rubric terms, that you still weave them in as well in a specific way. But Animal Farm seems like a decent choice for Merchant of Venice. I mean, it links well to a couple of other texts as well. Animal Farm, 1984, the Crucible, some clear links between those as well. But certainly the Merchant of Venice, if you're thinking about a divided society, one that can be oppressive, I can see those links. Just make it very clear and make sure you're engaging with the rubric there. Anything else? Anyone else have any other questions? Otherwise, I'm going to wrap up. My voice is going. Pleasure to go through it. Happy to talk a little bit longer. Is there anything you guys would like me to just rant about, like while I'm on it? So do you want, here's the website, jettle.com. If you guys want more specific resources on your texts, they're our best stuff. Greg got a question, no worries. Put it on there. If you guys have any topics, I'd be really interested to know. I know you guys want practical HSC advice, but I like talking about current issues as well and how they relate to the text. That's actually why I like English so much. It's why I especially have liked it since finishing school, because when I've looked back at the text, when I've been teaching them, I'm looking at it and seeing these connections to the real world, especially with some of these texts, like 1984. It's powerful stuff. And I like discussing it because it'll help you engage with the text, and it will help you to see why they're important, and it will help you to think. That's the main thing to get out of it, right? To think and to write. To write and to think. They go hand in hand, those two things. If you can't write something down clearly, then you probably can't think through it clearly, right? So writing forces you to think through something clearly. And by the same token, if you can think about something in a clear way, you'll be able to write it and articulate it that way. And that's very important as well. So those two skills are important. But Greg, just waiting to see your sentence pop up, I suppose. I think a little bit of lag here. So bear with me, guys. I'll do one more review and then we'll go from there. Any other questions or topics that would be interesting for us to discuss? And also, can I, just for everyone who's here as well, just give me some feedback. Would you guys be comfortable at some point, like coming on, sharing the screen and stuff and just having a dialogue, even if I'm like looking at your essays and stuff? Are you guys comfortable with coming on the cam for a bit, asking your questions that way, having a discourse? Because that would be appreciated. And the second thing is, before I look at this, Greg, especially for the students who are new here or new to year 12, current year 12 students, you guys can, it's pretty, I mean, it's not easy, but it's relatively possible that you can just take $100 home on the weekend. We're running a show, Jettle Mastermind. Have a look at some of the episodes already. We're going to modify the questions so they're accessible for you guys just starting the course, right? So we're not going to treat it as though you've done the whole HSC yet, but we're going to give you questions that will help you revise for your subjects, okay? We'll make them accessible for you. 3 contestants, $100 for the winner. Takes like 15 minutes. Come and join the show. So if you guys want to apply for our game show, the Jettle game show, $100 in cash, right? And you can do it online. You literally can join online. It's a lot of fun. 15 minutes. It'll help you revise. Then make sure you fill out our form. Go to one of our Jettle Mastermind episodes on YouTube. And in the bio, there is a form to fill out for you to apply. And we're going to be running a couple of shows very soon. So jump on that if you want to compete. It's pretty good fun. And, it's entertaining and helpful. So, yeah, Greg, just having a look at this one. Excuse me. Texts raise questions which provide insights into the human experience. Really? All right. To what extent has Miller raised questions? I mean, I like that aspect of it, I guess. Raising questions. That's pretty good. And what are the insights? So you've clearly got two key words there, Greg, right? What are the questions that Miller raises, and what are the insights that come from that? And straight away, I'll give you one way of breaking it down. So if I'm thinking about an essay, right? Thinking about an essay, I'm thinking I have 3 paragraphs. I've got like a problem. I've got the consequence of that problem or the struggle of the individual in response to that problem. And then I've got the resolution, if there is one. Okay? I've got those 3 kind of paragraphs. I've got those 3 concepts. So if I'm thinking about the problem, what's the problem? Well, Miller does raise a question about the dangers of being complicit, right? Of being complicit, subservient, passive, right? We acquiesce, we just go along with things, right? Of being complicit in ideologically corrupt regimes or mandates, right? We sign up to these systems that are actually not in our favor, but we're afraid of being isolated from the community. So Miller raises the question to begin with, if we're thinking about the Crucible, think about the start. He raises the question about how or to what extent, he raises a question concerning the extent to which individuals are willing to forfeit their autonomy, right? Their autonomy, their freedom, in order to remain accepted in society or by society, okay? To what extent are individuals willing to forfeit their integrity in the name of communal or social inclusion, right? People want to preserve their reputation in the Crucible. People want to preserve their reputation, but at what cost? And the question Miller is raising is he's saying, are you truly willing to forfeit your right to speak freely or your right to defend the truth merely to be accepted as part of a community that is predicated on ideological allegiance, where no one actually has a say, where no one actually has the right to speak freely? Like, you're forfeiting the right to speak freely to be part of a community that is all about protecting the appearance of of truth, of protecting the truth. They allege to protect that, but they actually are destroying it. So Miller is compelling us to question how much we're willing to do that. How willing are we to be complicit, to conform to these perverse ideological mandates? Question 1. Question 2, Miller also raises a question about our role as individuals. And I'll put it as a question. What is our role as an individual in response to ideological mandates? I'm saying ideological mandate. Ideological means these ways of thinking, and a mandate means like it's a system, like a government system, or it's the church, or it's the court in the Crucible. How much are we willing to, or what is our role rather? So how much are we willing to forfeit that? And what is our role in defending truth against these corrupt totalitarian mandates, right? So I think they're the 2 key questions. But if you want to think about the individual, what is the role of the individual, then Proctor kind of answers that. And then the last one, so for your resolution paragraph, so they were for the first 2 paragraphs. What's the ultimate problem? What's the consequence for the individual? Well, the individual must question what their role is. And then the third one is, what sacrifice is necessary? What sacrifice is necessary to overcome a perversion of truth that extends beyond the individual, right? It's a perversion of truth that is collective, right? It's pervasive, it's everywhere. Well, what kind of sacrifice does an individual need to make? So Miller is trying to wake us up to that by saying, hey, Proctor had to make the ultimate sacrifice. And if we don't all speak up, if we don't stand up for the truth, then we will too, right? You either pay the price with your integrity, you lose your individuality, or we band together as a community and defend what we know to be true, and we condemn what we know to be unjust. Okay, so there's some key questions and considerations for you, Greg. Hopefully that helps. I know it was a little bit long-winded, but hopefully that does help. And when I said those questions, I was connecting that to insights that you could offer there. Okay, let's have a look at this one. The resolution is not just the ending of a story, but also the beginning of the story the characters will live in after the cover is closed. Correct. I like that question, actually. Discuss how 1984 represents human experiences through form. Well, I like that it asked about form as well. Thank you, Plegie. I hope I'm saying that right. Plegie. Appreciate that. No worries. If I can help more, just send us questions our way. If you guys are enjoying it, make sure you subscribe to our channel. Join General Masterminds as well. Apply for that. No worries, Greg. That's all good. So this is going to be the last one I do, guys. The resolution is not just the ending of a story, but the beginning of the story the characters will live in after the cover is closed. Very kind of figurative, cryptic. It's deep. This is a deep question, and I like it. It's philosophical. That's the word I'm thinking of. It's deep and philosophical. Now, how does 1984 represent human experiences through form? Let me just rattle off a few aspects of form that you should talk about. I'm not going to go into too much depth on it. We have YouTube videos about the form of 1984, so make sure you check it out. But let's think about it. It's a prose fiction novel. It's a dystopian fiction. It's dystopian. It's about a nightmarish world. Why is that important? Because it scares us, it frightens us, it awakens us to what is possible. It's a satire. It takes things to their most logical extreme, their most logical end. And that also scares us. If we allow a totalitarian government like that of Big Brother, like that of Stalin, to continue, then where does that take us? It takes us to the world of 1984. Okay? So it's a satire. Everything in it is pulled to its most absurd extreme because it is trying to make it so obvious to us how absurd the whole system is. The best way to kind of convey a truth sometimes is to take things to their most logical extreme. 1984 is such an extreme totalitarian world. It's such a nightmarish reality, such a dystopia that, and the irony is so apparent in all of it, right? The satire is so strong, which is all that use of irony and ridicule and paradoxes, that it's hard to ignore how absurd that reality is. And then we connect that to the realism, another aspect of the form, the realism of the novel. And the realism means, hey, there are some things in that novel that kind of connect to the real world that we're living in right now. And they would be thinking that in 1949 when the novel was published. And they'd be thinking, oh, it mentioned things about the great purges. Stalin was doing great purges. Stalin was killing off millions of people who disagreed with him. Stalin was having a great famine. Holodomor, I hope I'm saying that correctly. In the Ukraine, 3.5 to 5 million people died. Did you know that? In a famine, a man-made famine. In the Soviet Union in the 1930s, 3.5 to 5 million people died of starvation because the Soviet Union, at Stalin's lead, right? Stalin was the ruler. They didn't want people to be able to think critically, so they starved them, right? They starved them because if you're starving, you can't think about, oh, is this government the best government to have? You're just thinking, when's my next meal? There are millions of people dying from that because they don't want people to be able to think critically and challenge the authority of the government, okay? So all of that's going on. I'm trying to think how I got into that. That was connecting the satire, the extremes, to the realism, that there are actually some aspects there that resonate with the present context in which the novel was written, and also in our context right now. You guys should research North Korea. Listen to some things on that. I'm actually thinking about doing a video on that, connecting it to 1984, because there's actually someone who defected, meaning they got out of North Korea, and she's a brilliant person and very brave, and she speaks about everything that's going on in North Korea. And I'm telling you, it's the same, if not worse, than what you read in 1984. It's uncanny, the similarities put it that way. So the world of 1984 has kind of materialized in the real world. I know that's a tangent. You don't talk about that in your essay, sorry, but that's just crazy to think about. So let's think about other aspects of form. I'm just addressing the form. We've got dystopian. It's a dystopian fiction. It's prose fiction, meaning it's written, in the long form. It's, conversational, everyday English. It's more accessible that way. Our imagination is involved in that prose fiction novel form. It's a satire. It wants to exaggerate things and hyperbolize things so that we are frightened by that reality. It wants to awaken us and propel us into rebellious action, into critical thought. We need to think critically. No one in 1984 thinks critically. Winston can think critically, and then he's punished and tortured and basically reduced to a slave. He's a mere slave by the end. Excuse me. Matt, I will link that in a second. Actually, I'll try and address that at the end. Greg, there will be more of these live Q&As. Guys, there will be more. We'll put out notice. You have to be subscribed to our YouTube channel to get notification of when they will be. And also follow our Instagram, Ask Jedel. Guys, if you follow Ask Jedel, we put out notifications on there whenever we're going to do a live stream. So if you really want to be in the know, you've got to follow us on Instagram at Ask Jedel. Okay, heaps of free content on there as well. But the stories on our Ask Jedel page and our post will tell you whenever we have these. I'm going to be personally running some workshops later on these texts. If you want the full breakdown, I think I've done some of them like 6 to 8 hours. I don't necessarily need to go for that long, but I just go through like every aspect of the essay sentence by sentence. So you got a full essay. I will do those workshops as well coming up. If you want to find out about those, you can send me an email, Jonny, Jonny, no H, Jonny, Jonny, no H, @jedel.com. And you can say, I'm interested in a workshop for this text. Okay, if you say that, you'll be on our waiting list and you'll get first priority. I only do it with a small group. Okay, so back to this aspect of form. It's also speculative because it's futuristic and speculative. These are all terms you should be using, Daniel, and anyone else doing 1984 when you're talking about form. 1984 was written in 1949. So Orwell is speculating as to what the future will look like. You can see how all of these aspects of form and genre overlap, right? It's a speculative fiction. We're projecting into the future because we're trying to caution the reader as to what could happen if we allow this kind of society to continue. We're descending. We have people like Stalin in power. We had Hitler. We have these totalitarian leaders who are stripping away our ability to think for ourselves. We're descending into tyranny. We need to wake up. Just like the Crucible, they're very similar texts in that sense. Now, it's about heightening the collective consciousness, making us aware of what's going on. In terms of the speculative form as well, it's important to note that it's a cautionary tale. It's a cautionary tale. That's a good term to use. Orwell's cautioning us against the perversions of truth, the perversions of reality that result from totalitarian regimes like that of Big Brother, like that of Stalin. Okay, it's very much tied to what Stalin was doing in the Soviet Union at this time and before, as well as Hitler as well. But it's mainly about Stalin, I would say, in terms of those relevant contextual links. Hopefully that helps you a little bit with form there. There are a couple of other things, but futuristic, speculative. Even if we wanted to, stretch form a little bit wider in terms of what that encompasses, I would be also talking about the fact that the novel has a pastiche. It has the Goldstein's manual kind of laid in there. So you get this kind of, a manual within the novel. So there's a bit of pastiche going on there, and you can think about why that's important. You also get the fact that it's third-person limited narration. So the novel focalizes Winston's point of view so that we can humanize his experience, his human experience, and allow the audience to empathize with his struggle to defend truth, to rebel against Big Brother, right? And actually, triumph ideologically and in terms of his freedom. But he doesn't, he fails, right? Is everything hopeless? Like absolutely hopeless? It seems that way, but you could argue that if you guys read the appendix to the novel, the appendix is really important. It suggests that it actually is very difficult to completely abolish, and control the human language. Language is such an innate human instinct. That's how language has evolved to this day. At one point in time, we didn't have verbal language. We didn't have words. At some point, we didn't have words. So it's very hard to completely control that. So if you read the appendix, he kind of suggests that to get rid of things like Shakespeare and all of those great authors, Milton, I think he mentions as well, it's going to take a lot of time, and they project that out to 2050. So even though it's 1984, the appendix is like, oh, well, we couldn't get the last edition of Newspeak until 2050. You've got to really know the novel to understand what I'm saying right now, but just be aware that Orwell doesn't suggest that it's completely hopeless. He's saying that if we can act now with urgency, we can avoid that. And I think we avoided it in some ways, and as I said, North Korea have kind of ended up with a world that's almost worse than 1984. Okay. Let's go to the other bit. You need to obviously connect your essay constantly, not just to form. Form is like the how, but what about the why? What about the purpose? That connects to the quote there. The resolution is not just the ending of a story, but also the beginning of the story the characters will live in after the cover is closed. Again, that's deep. Who are the characters? The characters are going to live in after it's closed. Well, it's basically saying that the fate is in your hands as the responder. You have to respond to this text in a proactive and critical way. If you want Winston and the characters who live in Oceania to have any kind of future, and let's just say Winston arguably got shot in the back of the head. Maybe that was figurative. It doesn't matter. If you want anyone who lives, the characters who live in the world of Big Brother, to have a better ending, because it says it's the beginning of their story. What happens after that cover is closed? Well, that depends on us. So that's how I bring it back. The reader has an active role. The responder has to engage in a critical way so that we're questioning the motivations of these perverse totalitarian mandates, and we actually stand up and voice dissent together. If we only do it as individuals, we're going to be persecuted and basically killed like Winston is. If we can bind together as a collective, like the proles, but be conscious, unlike the proles, because they're not aware of what's going on, but they're like 85% of the population. If we can all wake up together, then we will shape a more optimistic, a more hopeful future for those characters in the story the characters in the story are manifestations or embodiments of the collective that we all are a part of, okay? That's the deep thing there. When it's figurative, when it has that phrase there, the characters will live in. When it says the characters, it's saying, what kind of future do you want to live in? Well, how are you going to respond to this novel? What was George Orwell's authorial intent? That's really what it's saying. What's his intent? His intent is to wake the responder up. We need to be critical. We need to question. All right, what do we need to question? Again, the legitimacy of government motivations. We need to work together as a collective in exercising independent thought. So almost like a paradox there. As a collective, we need to be individual. Because if we're individuals, then it is futile. And that's what's represented. Rebellion is futile in the novel when rebellion is individual. But when you have a collective of individuals all exercising their autonomy, all questioning the legitimacy of the government, then you can have a more optimistic future. So we need to do that. And that's what it's talking about it's not just the ending of the story. The ending of the story suggests a relatively futile kind of future, or rather it suggests that rebellion is futile. However, the appendix, that's where you're going to stand out, Daniel. Look at the appendix, get something from that, and finish on that and say, look, the appendix suggests that there is some hope, but it's up to the responder to shape that future. We determine how dystopian or utopian the future for these characters are. Those characters are embodiments of us as a society, and we need to think critically to avoid descending into that totalitarian world that is the world of Big Brother. Okay, hopefully that helps you, Daniel, if you're still listening, and anyone else who was listening to that breakdown of 1984, some breakdown of form, some breakdown of that question. I really do like that question. It's figurative. You've got to run with that figurative kind of tone throughout your essay as well. And Matt, to your question, can you discuss moral absolutism in the Crucible? Moral absolutism is a funny one. It's saying like, whatever we say is right, and whatever we say is wrong is wrong. It's absolute. Absolutism means it's black and white. There are no alternatives. It's the opposite of moral relativism, where individuals can actually think about morality for themselves. Oh, I think this is right. I think this is wrong. Moral absolutism is saying, hey, no, the state, the church, the theocracy says that witches are bad and witches are real. And it also says that you shall not deny the existence of witchcraft, right? It's this absolutism which is dangerous. Absolutism is a pathway towards tyranny, right? Because you're suggesting that there's no scope for debate. There's no scope for discourse. There's no subjectivity in determining what might be right or wrong in a given situation. It is all prescribed by the Bible or whatever it is, by the church. No gray area there to debate. So that's what moral absolutism is. It's a very dangerous course of action. Guys, the quote, Matt also, especially this quote, the world is still gripped by two diametrically opposed absolutes. Yeah, that's a nice quote. The world is still gripped by two diametrically opposed absolutes. The world was gripped by the hands, right? Figurative hands of the Soviet Union, which we now know as like Russia, Ukraine, etc. All of that, the Soviet Union at that time was defending communism. Communism was spreading around the world. China had just become communist. So that's one way of thinking where the government kind of owns everything and the people all just work for the government, and the government, the state, owns all the property. And also it means that there's a dictator there. So the person who runs the government has all the power. They decide everything. It's a dictatorship. On the other side, this is the other hand that gripped the world. It was about democratic freedoms, democracy, and America represented that. And because there were these two extremes, just like in America today, they have like Republicans and Democrats, the left and the right together. Like that's inside of America, they now have these diametrical oppositions. But if we're looking at America and the Soviet Union as two sides, we have the communism where government controls everything. There's a dictatorship. That's not great. And I should put up this. I should have had this. Moral absolutism, as I said, is that now if you have these two diametrically opposed views, communism and democracy, capitalism, where people can actually make money if they work hard. Communism, you work, it's just all to the government. The government gives you, a stipend, and they give you a couple of rations and tokens, food vouchers and stuff, right? That's that world. That's communism. Not great. Government has all the power. Democracy is where we can say what we like, freedom of speech. But even in America then, because we have such opposition, because America was so protective of its ideology, ironically, paradoxically, it was defending freedom, but because it wanted to defend it so badly, it made everyone super scared of the communism. So because everyone became scared of communism in the Soviet Union, because the government was trying to defend its way of thinking, which was about democracy and capitalism, everyone became so scared that they no longer felt like they could speak freely. So there's those diametric oppositions, because they're so polarized, because they're so split, those two ways of thinking, those two paradigms. Ironically, the individuals who wanted to protect democracy lost their democratic freedoms, such as freedom of speech, freedom of thought, because you would be isolated if you challenge the government, okay? So you don't want moral absolutism, you don't want extremes, but we had two extremes going up against, and if you challenge either of those governments, then you are going to be deemed as a suspicious individual, and you are going to be alienated. You're a suspect. We're going to put you under trial, and you're not going to want to do that because your reputation is going to be ruined, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So hopefully that answers that. What are my opinions of starting your essay with a quote? Do not start your essay with a quote unless the quote is in the question directly. And I would only then use a little bit of the quote, not the whole quote they give you. Otherwise, you're repeating the question. I would use a little key word or words from the quote and unpack that and be specific about it and use it in a clever way like that. But otherwise, do not start your essay with a quote. Do not have a quotation in your introduction unless the question itself has a quotation, in which case you should break that down and take little snippets of it. Don't say the whole thing, otherwise you're just repeating the question. All right, thank you, Armin. That's all, guys. Hopefully that helped, guys. Jettle.com, as I said, is the best spot to go for our most comprehensive resources. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. I'm going to run another one of these. Hopefully that helped you guys. You have to follow us on Instagram to be notified of these. Here it is. I'm just going to put it on here for you. Ask Jedel. Guys, follow Ask Jedel on Instagram, and you'll be notified of when I'm doing this. Send me an email, jonny@jedel.com, if you're interested in my private workshops where I'll break this all down for you, build your essays with you to the point you have a full essay by the end. If you want to do that at some point in the future during this HSC year, send me an email and you'll get priority on the waiting list. Thank you guys for tonight. I hope that helped. I'll speak to you guys soon. Take it easy.